All right, boys. UFC 313 finally here. Alex Pereira versus Magomed Ankalaev, a matchup I've been looking forward to for a long time. I think Magomed presents some interesting troubles for Alex. I think Alex is going to be live to knock Magomed out or at least hurt him and chew up the calf. And a ton more reasons for who I'm going to pick is coming your way in just a little bit. But first, if you want to get every single one of my bets for UFC 313, go to winnable.com/HOF picks and use code parlay for a 5-day free trial, and make sure to cancel before that trial's up if you don't want to stay a premium member. That way you don't get charged and you can get the bets for this weekend. But if we crush it, I have a feeling you're going to want to stay. We're up 7.2 units on the year. Little by little, just building the bankroll up. If we take losses like we did last week, it's 2 units. I'm not out here losing 10, 15, 20 units a card. Never have, never will. It's not my style. I'm very strategic, very disciplined, and it's made us money for the last 2 years while we've been doing this last 2 years straight. So last thing, this show is now powered by BetUS, which is a sports book you can use in 49 of 50 states. So if you live in California, Texas, or any of those states where you can't get DraftKings and FanDuel, BetUS is going to be available to you. I'm going to drop the link in the description. And if you want to get 150% deposit match bonuses on your first 3 deposits, you just got to use the link down below. So all these odds you're going to be seeing on the screen are from BetUS. And my last thing before we jump in, check out these new graphics here in a minute that I'm going to put on the screen for when we're breaking down these cards. They're beautiful. They're well done. And they came from none other than my wife. I can't take any credit for everything you're about to see on the screen during the show. A shout out to my wife. She worked hard on them. And, she's contributing. She's super supportive. Good to have a good woman in your corner. And check out her work coming up here. So without any further ado, the first fight on the card. I don't know if this is the first fight or not. They've kind of been switching the card around a little bit, but we're going to go based off what it's listed at right now. John Castaneda taking on Chris Gutierrez. I actually like one of these guys a lot to win this fight. I'm going to start with Chris Gutierrez, 25-1. He's got some extensive experience in the UFC. He does things well. My biggest knock on him is that he doesn't really separate himself in some of these fights. It's like he goes down to the wire and it's, 1-1 going into the third round a lot of the time. And then he kind of pulls away with the calf kicks and he's got a good jab and he does throw decent volume. He's never really throwing to take your head off or find a knockout. He's never really going to go out there and submit many guys. I mean, I look at his last fight against Quang Lee, who, Quang is a guy who came off road to the UFC, and I never thought he was that good whatsoever. He was able to take down Chris Gutierrez, put him on his back, took his back at one point when Chris was trying to get up, got his hooks in, was threatening with submissions, and Chris was controlled for like 4 minutes of that entire round, and that made it 1-1 going into the third. Quang Lee was exhausted, he gassed, and Chris just picked him apart with calf kicks and jabs and ultimately won the fight. But again, he had Quang Lee gassed, he had him hurt, and he just didn't go for the kill. I hate seeing that. It's not fun to watch. It's not pleasing, especially when you know that he is a very skilled guy. And then standing across from him, first after Quang Lee lost to Chris Gutierrez, he went in against Zhao Long or Long Zhao, a guy who I don't think is talented whatsoever, a guy who doesn't have very much power, doesn't have great submission games. He's just kind of a marauder who swings wild and puts you up against the cage and wants to just hold you there. He knocked out Quang Lee. He finished that fight. So if that tells you anything. And Quang Lee kind of went toe-to-toe and made it close until the third round with Chris. John Castaneda on the other side, a little more dynamic all the way around. He's going to do way more than just chop the leg and jab you. He's going to try to get into the pocket, land some big combinations. He's going to mix in wrestling too. He was scheduled to fight last week on the Apex card at 135 pounds, and he cut weight, and that was canceled, pretty last minute. And now he's fighting at 145 pounds against Chris Gutierrez. Technically he's cutting weight again because he's a big guy, down to 145. He doesn't have to cut those last 10 pounds. But I still think he's pretty decent size for 145 pounds. Being a bantamweight is kind of surprising at times when you look at him. And Chris Gutierrez, he's a little tall, but he's not a super big guy by any means for this division. I don't think he's very strong either. I think Chris is going to have to win this fight at keeping that range, staying on the outside, dancing around the octagon, using the calf kicks and the jab. And I just really think John Castaneda is going to get into his face and make him brawl it out at times, where I think he's going to land the more powerful shots. And I also think he's going to have chances to put him up against the cage and get takedowns. And on the ground, I think he's better than Quang Lee. I think he can get into dominant positions. I just think Chris Gutierrez might land more volume here, but the more damaging shots I see coming from John Castaneda, a guy who's going to go out there and have that killer instinct, I think is John Castaneda in the grappling upside, John Castaneda. So you could probably tell by now in the first fight of the night, John Castaneda is going to be my pick. And, he's right there at minus 110. I don't think that's a bad line at all. Or maybe he switched from minus 110. Sorry, I'm looking at previous odds. The line's pretty decent. I don't expect either of these guys to flip to a decent sized underdog or anything. But yeah, I'm taking John Castaneda in fight number 1. Now, next fight, an interesting one. Jordan Santos taking on Ozzy Diaz. Man, if you watch Ozzy Diaz on tape, there's times you're like, man, this guy can put it together. Like if he really bites down and trains hard and works on some things, he could be a really good fighter. But you watch him in the octagon, and it's like the first time he takes a big shot, everything changes. And then from there, he's just kind of a sitting duck until he gets knocked out against some of these heavy hitters. He's 9-3. He doesn't have the most experience in the world. He fought on the Contender Series against Joe Pyfer, where he was finished. Then went back down to LFA and got some good wins. Chuck Campbell, Bavon Lewis. And then they throw him to Mingyang Zhang, which is a tough fight for anybody at this level just because of his power, man. Mingyang Zhang is a guy who likes to march forward. He's going to eat some shots, but if he likes to counter you, but if you leave your hands down for a split second and he connects, he's more than likely going to put you out. And that's exactly what happened in that fight. And for Jordan Santos, he's coming off of the Contender Series where it was kind of hard to find tape on the guy and really see what he was going to have at this level. There's times on the regional scenes and the film that you can find he didn't look great whatsoever, but he kind of surprised me on the contenders. Will Curry, the guy he beat, is a Cage Warrior alumni, a guy who likes to grapple. Not the best striking in the world, but he is good at putting guys against the cage and just kind of wearing you down until he gets the fight to the mat and he can do his thing. Jordan Santos stuffed the takedowns, showed pretty dynamic striking in my opinion. It's not like he is a guy who is super, super raw on the feet. I mean, I like the way that he was kind of landing these 1-2s on Will Curry. The hands would come up and then he'd rip the body with 2 big hooks. And he kind of did that over and over. Ultimately won a decision, and he was in full control for most of the fight, especially when it was at range. I do think he has a little power. I do think he at times is going to look to take Ozzy Diaz's head off. And honestly, I just think he's a little more athletic. He moves better. He's going to be faster. And at some point, he's going to find a big shot on Diaz and probably find the knockout. But if not, I think he's going to have way bigger moments throughout the course of the fight. I look at Diaz, and I just really can't see what his path to victory is in this spot. Are you going to go wrestle him? I mean, I doubt it. If Will Curry had no success, I don't think Ozzy Diaz is going out there and doing that. Are you going to knock Jordan Santos out? He could land a big shot. I think that's kind of his, that's how he gets his win here. And I just don't really see that likely of happening. I think Santos is going to be too slick for him, and he eventually is going to land a big shot of his own. Give me Jordan Santos, and the line is not as big as I thought it would be for an Ozzy Diaz fight. So keep that into consideration. All right, next fight up. Dude, another good fight. People aren't going to know a lot of these guys. Like if you're just a pay-per-view watcher, a casual, as some people might say, nothing wrong with that whatsoever. This sport would be nothing without the casual fans. You're not going to recognize some of these names, but I would suggest watching the prelims because some of these names you're going to know in a couple of years. And I think Myron Santos in this fight against Francis Marshall is one of those names that you got to look out for. Francis Marshall is actually a pretty good fighter. And I also think Francis Marshall is a guy who's constantly improving. You look at his UFC career so far, he's fought some tough competition. He comes in on Dana White's Contender Series and beats Connor Matthews by decision. Connor Matthews is a guy who just went out there and unfortunately lost to Jose Delgado. But after that in Orlando, he fights Marcelo Rojo. I was at that fight. The line was somewhat tight, and Francis Marshall looked really good and got the second round finish via knockout. But then he fights William Gomi, a guy who's, even though William Gomi just lost to Hyder Emil, and, people think he's boring. He's a tough style to kind of figure out because he's going to dance around the outside. He's got good defensive striking. Like we saw Emil swing and miss a ton of times in that fight. Gomi doesn't have the most power. but he does have okay grappling. And, Francis Marshall was able to take William Gomi down twice. The strikes, there wasn't a lot going on with the striking in that fight, but he loses a split decision in a very close fight. You know who else went to split decisions with William Gomi? Anderson Britu, which he lost, and Gomi got the win, and Hyder Emil, another guy who's got a lot of hype and a lot of people think he's going to be very good. And then Francis Marshall was also able to do something similar, just not on that volume type striking scale that those other guys did. His next fight, he gets Isaac Dolgarian. That's a nightmare. Isaac takes him down and just beats him to a pulp. Then he gets Dennis Bazooka, and he looked really good to me, especially in the first round. He drops Dennis Bazooka. His striking looked really, really crisp. His volume was there. He just looked way more confident on the feet than I had ever seen him, probably since the Connor Matthews fights, to be honest. In that Connor Matthews fights, Marshall went with the wrestling for most of it too. But while he was on the feet, against Bazooka, he looked pretty damn good. Did get a little bit tired, and Bazooka worked himself back into the fight after being badly hurt and almost stopped. And, Francis kind of ate some shots there towards the end and was hurt a bit too. But now he's going up against Myron Santos, who isn't the most experienced guy from a high level standpoint. This is going to be, technically his first fight in the UFC, because the last one was on a UFC card, but it was the Ultimate Fighter. And Myron Santos is a dangerous striker. He's a dynamic striker. He's going to hit you with really fast twitch kicks to the midsection. He's going to, use his boxing. He's comfortable fighting going backwards, downhill, you name it. So Marshall's going to have to mind his P's and Q's. And I think if Marshall wants to win the fight, he's really got to go hard on the wrestling. But Myron Santos has shown in fights on the regional scene, his takedown defense is pretty good. He looks like he's technical with it. It's not like he's just fighting cans and, can stuff their takedowns. He does all the right things. He's training at Extreme Couture with phenomenal coaches like Eric Nixick and training partners. Santos is going to be ready. And it's a guy I think you got to watch out for. Even though Marshall might make this closer to what this line is saying, I think Myron Santos is eventually either going to find the big shot or just outclass him while it's on the feet and land way more damage in the spot. So taking Myron Santos either by knockout or decision would be my best guess. But a banger fight nonetheless. And, we go from this fight, which is going to be a banger, to Alex Morono versus Carlos Leal, which is going to be a weird one. I just have a weird feeling about it. Carlos Leal comes in against Renat Fakhretdinov and gets absolutely robbed blind in Abu Dhabi or Saudi Arabia. I can't remember exactly. I think it was Saudi Arabia. Maybe not. But, Renat, home crowd basically in that spot. Carlos making his debut, looks all juiced to the gills, acne all over his back that everybody talks about all the time. And he fought phenomenally. He stuffed some takedowns. When he did get taken down, he was able to work back up, and he hit Renat with a ton of big shots. And I was super impressed with him for making his debut. But then I look at some of these guys who come in on short notice and they fight way up the rankings from what a normal debut guy off the Contender Series would fight. Like I think of like Felipe dos Santos, who came in against Manel Kopp last a year and a half ago, and way overperformed. Took it to Kopp for 5 rounds and made it a tough fight for both guys. Felipe dos Santos landed some big shots on Kopp, and then in his next fight, he should have lost to Victor Altamirano. So sometimes these guys overperform in their debuts. I don't necessarily think that's the case with Carlos Leal. I just think his striking, like a lot of people's striking, is better than Renat Fakhretdinov's, and Fakhretdinov's gas tank is kind of garbage too. And so Carlos Leal was able to have a lot of success. Going up against Alex Morono, though, Alex, a few years ago, I would take him at this price for sure, but he just hasn't really shown us much as of recent. He's a guy who's got pretty fast hands for what he does. His boxing isn't bad whatsoever. He's got good jiu-jitsu on the ground. Not great wrestling, not great takedown defense, but he'll throw some decent volume. And like I said, his hands aren't bad. But he has fought, I guess it's all started kind of with Ponzinibbio, Santiago Ponzinibbio, about 2.5 years ago, where he was beat and finished in the 3rd round. Then he fights Tim Means and gets a win. But then he fights Joaquin Buckley and was taken down a couple of times and hit with some big shots. Loses to Nico Price, which was kind of my breaking point with Alex Morono, where I'm like, all right, he's a step slower, he's older, he's gassy, and this guy got tired against Nico. And yes, Nico threw good volume and was tired too, but man, that fight looked like it was taking place in slow motion. And going against the guy like Leal, who's going to have fast hands and heavy hands, I think Alex, as the fight goes on, will get opened up to be hit. Then he fights D-Rod. Yeah, Daniel Rodriguez. And Daniel Rodriguez landed 123 significant strikes to Alex's 74. Alex loses that fight. D-Rod at this point in his career, nothing to really write home about. So I think Carlos should be the winner. Is he a minus, 700, minus 800 type of spot for him? I don't really think so, just because Alex is a veteran and Carlos does have a lot of experience. But, Renat Fakardinov just has so many holes. And, you know, I just have this thing where sometimes these guys I think overperform in their debut against ranked fighters towards the top of the division. So taking Carlos Leal for the pick. Does he knock him out? Not so sure. Not really interested in betting on that type of thing in this spot. But I wouldn't be surprised if Alex Morono can take a round off of him at some point, or just make it a little bit better fight than these odds are going to tell you. So, but don't get it twisted. I'm not betting or taking Alex Morono here whatsoever. All right. A fight I've already put a video out coming up now is Bruno Ferreira and Armen Petrosyan. On paper, like Anthony Smith says, on paper, Armen Petrosyan should walk through Bruno Ferreira. Bruno, it's not that he's a bad fighter. He's just wild. He's got a ton of power in his hands for sure. He's pretty good with his judo and his tosses, and can get fights to the ground. Apparently got a pretty good submission game too that he doesn't ever really show. But he's kind of fallen in love with that, big power punching overhand right, spinning elbows type of striking. He's found some success with it over guys like Dustin Stoltzfus, not that good. Phil Hawes, maybe the worst chin in the history of the UFC. And then he knocked out Gregory Rodriguez, which really is the only win on his record that jumps out at me as like, okay, that's a great win to have under your belt. Other than that, he has a loss to Nursultan Ruzabayev a minute and 17 seconds into that round, where Nursultan just caught a kick and kind of tapped him on the chin. I think he was more off balance. Like if you go back and watch it, I think he was a little off balance. The punch wasn't a big, crazy shot, but he lands back on the back of his head. And then it kind of looked like he went out a little bit, and Nursultan finished the fight. But my big concern for Bruno kind of came in basically the last two fights. Stoltzfus, he was getting tired, and he was getting beat and worked in that first round by Dustin Stoltzfus until 10 seconds left, where he lands some big spinning elbow and knocks him out. But then against Abus Magomedov, it was a close fight on the feet. Abus won the first round. Bruno hurt Abus in the second round, and then both guys were tired, and you guys know how Abus Magomedov gasses. It's horrible, terrible gas tank. He just gives up. He rolls over and lets you beat him. Bruno was the same way in that spot, and Abus was able to submit him in the third round just by taking him down a couple of times. And I've noticed in the last two spots, Bruno is so explosive and dangerous early, but he gasses. And he's not really, he's gassing against guys who I don't really think are phenomenal fighters by any means. Now, Armen Petrosyan, not a phenomenal mixed martial artist, I would say, but he is a very good kickboxer. Before the UFC, he had like 93 kickboxing matches where he was 70-23. It's not that he holds a bunch of power in his hands, but if he places a well-timed kick, he can definitely knock people out with it. He does a very good job at chewing up the lead leg of his opponents, and then he'll start mixing in those body kicks, and he just throws a ton of volume. The guy lands nearly 6 significant strikes per minute, and he's had a fair share of fights go to a decision, so he has a lot of octagon time. So that data, I think he throws a legit 6 significant strikes per minute. Striking defense is pretty good. He's only getting hit with a little more than half of that. Takedown defense has kind of been a problem, but against Rodolfo Vieira, who's one of the best grapplers in the division. AJ Dobson took him down a couple of times, but even though AJ took him down, Armen hit him with 120 significant strikes. And then he got taken down 4 times by Caio Bahayo, which, everybody knows about Caio. So, Bruno can come out here and get a knockout in round 1, but if he doesn't, I think he's in big trouble. I really do. I think Armen is going to expose him with the striking and kind of dance around the outside and make Bruno chase him while hitting him with the jab, countering him, chewing up his leg, and just finding those head and body kicks that eventually I think Bruno's going to crumble to. I think somebody gets finished in this spot. I like this fight to end inside the distance, but I also like Armen Petrosyan to get it done, and I think he can definitely get a round 2 or round 3 finish. Armen Petrosyan is going to be the pick. I just think he's better. But Bruno is going to be live for a knockout, especially early in the fight. All right. That's a banger, though. It should be fun. Next fight, everybody's talking about, everybody is betting on this person, and it's kind of scary when this happens. We got Joshua Van versus Ray Tsuruya, and, this is kind of a clash of styles. Joshua Van, phenomenal boxer, great speed with his hands, kind of evolving. He's taken so many fights in a row that he's getting so much experience at the UFC level. And he's fought some good fighters as well. Charles Johnson, he got knocked out by in the third round, but Charles 4-fight win streak until last week, and is very well rounded and phenomenal cardio. Oh, who else did he fight? Oh, just recently, Cody Durden, where he put on a master class. I mean, an absolute master class for 3 rounds. Outstruck Cody 165-70, and almost had Cody out of there a few times. Beats Edgar Shirez before that, ton of volume on him. Felipe Bunes, who just submitted Jose Johnson, Kevin Borjas, and Zalga Sumagulov on short notice in his debut, where he beat him. So Joshua Van is only 23 years old, and he is getting better. His hands are completely fine, but if he really fine tunes that wrestling defense, takedown defense, and maybe a little bit of offense mixed in there too, he's going to be a serious problem. Ray Tsuruya, complete opposite, not the best striker. He's 22 years old, so these are two very young guys. Ray Tsuruya is 10-0, doesn't have the best level of competition. I mean, he's a road to the UFC guy. I hate on those guys all the time. I thought the best one to come off the show was Rinya Nakamura, and look what happened to him against Moin Gafarov. It just looked completely awful. Didn't even go to his wrestling, even though he's an Olympic level Japanese wrestler. I mean, Ray is a Japanese jiu-jitsu guy. He's very slick with it. His scrambles are very good. But, he went to a split decision with Carlos Hernandez. Or I guess it was a unanimous decision. I thought it was split for whatever reason. But he goes to a somewhat close fight with Carlos Hernandez in his debut. Carlos isn't a very physical guy. He's not very strong. He doesn't have very much power in his hands. He's just kind of a very technical boxer who can wrestle a bit and, will look to submit you at times too. Nothing going to blow you away. And, Ray had a lot of success, 3 takedowns in the spot, didn't really do much with any kind of striking. And I just think in this spot, Van is going to be way more physically ready for that kind of style than a Carlos Hernandez was. And while it's on the feet, Van might just absolutely light him up. I don't know if Van knocks him out. Those Chinese guys, or not Chinese guys, those Japanese guys, I don't know why can't I think of his name? Just fought Brandon Royval. Tatsuro Taira. Can't believe I couldn't remember his name. Guys like that just seem to have an iron chin. They're young. They haven't had it touched that many times. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if Van knocks him out, but I do think it's going to get really ugly if Ray Tsuruya can't find the takedowns. But if he does find the takedowns, I don't really think it gets ugly for Van. I think Van knows what to do, is going to be able to get back to his feet. And I would be kind of shocked if he was able to submit Joshua Van. So I'll take Van for the pick. If you're betting on this fight, though, I think Van is just kind of getting mushed. Everybody's on him. The whole world is betting on Joshua Van. And you're getting a pretty good price tag on a guy who's 10-0, has already made his UFC debut. Going to be a little more comfortable in there in Ray Tsuruya. So value on Tsuruya, in my opinion. Joshua Van, I think it is his time. I think he's going to be a guy you hear a lot about for a long, long time. I mean, maybe the next 15 years, to be honest. So it should be a very good scrap. I'm interested to hear from you guys, who you guys got in the comments, because, like I said, I've seen basically nothing but Joshua Van love all week long. All right, again, guys, if you guys want to bet on these fights, but you live in a state like California or Texas, BetUS is available in 49 of the 50 states. They got every prop bet you could think of. You can parlay these guys, money lines, over-unders, fight not to go the distance, the knockouts in each round. They got so many options, and I'm going to leave the link in the description. Again, 49 of the 50 states. Your first 3 deposits are matched up to 150%. Get you a little extra money to bet at UFC 313. And the next fight, we're starting to get in some really, really good ones now. And, hold on. All right, maybe not the best fight here, but after this, I promise you it's going to get really, really good. But this one, we're getting Curtis Blaydes versus Rizvan Kuniev. If you don't know Rizvan Kuniev, this dude fought, oh man, I want to say PFL, right? And while he was in the PFL, he failed a drug test, and he just had everything you could possibly think of in his system. If there was a steroid on the market, this guy had it in his system. At that time, he beat Hernan Ferreira Am I saying that right? Renan Ferreira, the 6'8" guy who just lost to Francis Ngannou, but was terrorizing the heavyweight division in PFL for a long time. This guy Kuniev has a win over him. On the record, it's going to show no contest because of the failed drug test. But before the UFC and even on the Contender Series, Kuniev has looked really good. He's gotten his fair share of knockouts. He can find submissions as well. He wrestles a little bit. He just doesn't really have that one punch crazy knockout power. It's more of an accumulation thing. His striking seems pretty technical, sometimes lower volume, but at heavyweight, these guys gas out at lower levels. That's kind of when he's able to take over. Curtis Blaydes, my only question with Curtis Blaydes at this point in his career and in this fight is how is his chin? Because we've seen him knocked out by guys. Yes, it's some of the biggest hitters in UFC history. Francis Ngannou, Derek Lewis, Tom Aspinall, Sergey Pavlovich. But, even I don't even know if you can make the excuse that it's just against the power punchers because at some point that chin starts to go and you're getting hit by guys like that. It just doesn't mesh well. But Curtis Blaydes' boxing has improved so much from when he started before the UFC, and he's always got that really good wrestling in his back pocket. Hasn't really gone to it lately. Two of his last three fights have ended extremely fast, and the other one he was fighting a very explosive wrestler in Jailton Almeida. So he didn't really have a chance to offensively wrestle in there. But I think in this spot, if he does get rocked or he's not comfortable on the feet, I think he has that option. I do think he'll be the better wrestler. I think his boxing will be slicker. You just got to watch out for a big shot here and there from Kuniev. Or, I don't really think Blaydes is a guy who's going to gas out against a Rizvan Kuniev. But stranger things have happened, and we'll just see what happens if Blaydes can stand in there and take a little bit of damage this time. But I'm taking Curtis Blaydes for the pick. Don't really love the price. Um, I know a lot of people are going to be parlaying him, and that makes me a little bit nervous here this week. But he will be the pick nonetheless. And now we get into the main card. Kicking it off, Dana White said in an interview just the other day he likes to open these pay-per-view cards on the first prelim with a banger, which he did with, I guess it's going to be Jordan Santos and Ozzy Diaz. And then he loves to kick off the main card with the maybe most exciting fight that's not a title fight, which he did with King Green and Mauricio Hoofy. And this one's going to be interesting to me because Hoofy had so much hype going into the James Yontop fight and then didn't find the knockout that everyone expected and kind of got tired trying to chase down the knockout late in the fight. And now everybody thinks that maybe he's not as good as we once thought. I kind of disagree. I think James Yontop is a guy who just has a steel chin, who is going to be impossible to finish for a lot of guys. Even though I believe they cut James Yontop, which I didn't really like to see because he had fun. Every time he's in there, it's a fun fight, and I think he had a lot of fun fights ahead of him too in the division. He went in there against James Yontop. Went in there against Slava Claus, Vyacheslav Borshev, and went to split decision and won that third round and ate all of Slava's big boxing combinations and shots and just kept marching forward and worked himself back into the fight. But before the Yontop decision win for Rufi, he fought Jamie Malarkey in his debut, which everybody knows about Jamie's chin by now, and he looked phenomenal. He was touching Jamie up with every shot he threw, and then eventually, found the big knockout shot. But on the Contender Series, he fought a guy that was a good wrestler, and he was able to give Rufi some problems until late in the fight. Rufi found that shot and finished it late in the third round. King Green, though, kind of a different style than anybody Rufi has seen so far, and that's what makes it interesting to me. Bobby's not going to have the big power where he's going to go out there and starch Rufi with one shot if Rufi's not careful. Bobby is a guy who just has so much experience, so much volume, and his striking is very weird. The angles he hits you from are very weird, and it's hard to kind of tack down a little bit. And my one concern for Bobby, obviously, is chin. The guy has been knocked out. He ate 15 unanswered shots from Jalen Turner that was super unnecessary. And he's a little bit older now. And it all kind of started with that Drew Dober knockout he took. And my my thing I keep saying about him, and the thing I noticed is when he was really in his prime and winning a lot of fights at the UFC level, it's because of his head movement. And he wasn't there to be hit, and he was so fast. I think his hands are still fast. I just think he doesn't get out of the way of shots the way he used to. And against these big guys, a Jalen Turner, a Mauricio Hoofy, a Drew Dober, guys with power, I think he's going to pay the price more often than not. And this is another spot where I think he will be competitive at range. The best thing for Bobby here would be this fight to get into that midway through the second round and third round. He's going to have more success. But I also think the first big shot that Ruffy lands could end it right away because we've seen it happen with Bobby. Looks good until he doesn't, type of thing. And Ruffy is just so creative. He hits you with shots you don't see coming. He's going to spin and hit you with elbows. And he's a big, long guy for the division with great movement, too. So taking Mauricio Ruffy. I think he wins by knockout. But ultimately, we'll pick him to win this fight. Nothing against Bobby King Green. I love me some King Green, but it's just a little bit past this time. All right, now Amanda Lemos versus Yasmin Lucindo. Another fight with a 14-year age gap. I mean, you got Lucindo, who's 23 years old, looks very good so far in her UFC career. I mean, she made her debut. I want to say that was last minute too. I can't exactly remember, against Yasmin Jauregui. That was before Jauregui took her two losses by finish. One to Denise Gomes and the other one Ketlin Souza. But Yasmin Jauregui is a girl who's very, very talented, very fast, phenomenal striking. And Lucindo kind of went toe to toe with her, even though she didn't get the job done. The striking, she got outlanded a little bit, but she also had some good moments and shown that even for how young she is, she's got a ton of experience and she's way more mature than most 23-year-old fighters, for sure. She's very confident in herself. Her hands are fast, not like big knockout power by any means, but she will set up her takedowns with that striking, kind of close the distance. And it's not that she's a great wrestler, but she has good trips when she gets on top. She doesn't really go for a ton of submissions. She has a submission in the UFC against Polyana Viana, but most of the time she's looking to control you. She's looking to win minutes. She'll land, her elbows and look to get in certain positions where she can get off some ground and pound. But against a girl like Amanda Lemos, who's very, very experienced, who's fought nothing but the top girls for the last few years, it's going to be tough. My not even knock on Lemos, my question for Lemos is, after all these fights that she's had against, very good competition, getting beat pretty badly against Zhang Wei Li, beat up pretty badly, the Mackenzie Dern fight, Dern was able to work herself back into there after being hurt and gave her all she could handle in round 3. Verna Jandaroba took her down and submitted her in the second round. She's getting to that point where she's 37 years old. She's taken some damage. She has shown that she can be submitted, multiple times. Jessica Andrade got her in that standing arm triangle. And now you're going up against a young, hungry girl, Brazilian girl with a neck tat. Don't forget that model. And a girl who's going to she will be able to take your shots, I think, Lucindo, and she's going to throw back, but she's also going to look to get you to the ground, I think, too, where Lemos has been vulnerable. So I like the younger girl. I like a 14-year age gap. I do think Lemos as an underdog is going to catch the eye of a lot of people, but I think it's kind of a passing of the guard type of situation. So yeah, for those reasons, I'm taking Lucindo. I do think it's going to be a pretty good fight, and yeah, I'm not going to be surprised whatsoever if Lemos does pull it off again. She's one of the top fighters in the division. She's been fighting the top fighters for a long time, has all that experience, has skills everywhere. I just think it's a year where we're going to see some of these younger fighters start to pick up these wins over the vets and kind of passing of the torch there. All right. Now we're getting Jalen Turner and Ignacio Bahamondes. This is another fight people are kind of back and forth on the internet. Normally, you hear about how tall Jalen Turner is for this weight division. And, 155 pounds, 6'3", that gives him such a massive advantage over some of these guys. Mateusz Gamrot had to wrestle the whole time because there was no chance a guy with not the best striking was going to stand in there against a guy in Jalen Turner, who does have good striking, but is also 6'3" with a massive reach. Guys like that are just not going to be able to compete on the feet. Dan Hooker, a little bit taller for the division too, and is an absolute dog. And he was able to take Jalen Turner's shots and wait for Jalen to kind of slow down. And Dan came on late, had some big moments, and won the fight. He fights Bobby Green. It's another guy, like I said, fights with his hands down, is shorter, smaller, maybe lost a step. And Jalen Turner just has that crazy reach and was able to hit him. And then he gets beat by Renato Moicano. So Jalen Turner, to me, what I've seen, against Dan Hooker, against Moicano, is that when he faces a little bit of adversity, he kind of seems to crumble a little bit. And I don't like to say that about fighters because, any of us watching this show couldn't do what they're doing at this level. That's for sure. But as skilled as Jalen is, it's just like against Dan, man, he was looking really, really good. He was hitting Dan with big shots. He landed this head kick that I have no idea how Dan Hooker ate it. But after Dan ate it and hit Jalen with like the next few shots, Jalen slowed down. Jalen was wobbly. And it's not that Dan was even like landing the most powerful shots in the world. He was just kind of hitting him with volume. And Jalen started to crumble. And Dan put him in a submission at the end of round two. The bell rang, and that's what saved Jalen, or else he would have been submitted there. Gets to round three, and Dan does a lot of things really well there. He stayed on the gas, got in his face, landed some big shots, took him down, and at the end of the fight, had Jalen hurt once again. So um, I look at the Moicano fight. Moicano fought really well in the first round, and then Jalen hit him with one shot that dropped him. And after that, it gets to the second, and Moicano just takes him down again and lands some ground and pound. And Jalen didn't even really try to get up. He just covered up and took the shots that were landing on the guard, and he just wanted no piece of it. Like I said, hit adversity, and he was kind of done. Looked for the door, looked for the way out. He's fighting Ignacio Bahamondes here, who's also 6'3", a guy who has very good striking, very, very good volume, and is shown to have pretty good cardio too. Now, the levels of competition each one of these guys has fought is vastly different. Jalen Turner has been fighting killers. He's fought the best, and Ignacio Bahamondes is still kind of working his way up, fighting either older guys or prospects. I mean, I look at his record. He took a split decision loss to John McDessie. That's when Ignacio was very young. That was 4 years ago. But then after that, rattles off a big spinning wheel kick knockout against Roosevelt Roberts. Beats Rong Zhu, who beat Cody Steele a few weeks ago, by submission. Beats Trey Ogden before Trey Ogden kind of went on his little run, and loses to Ludovic Klein, who's beating everybody right now and is kind of showing that he's going to be a problem in the division. But after that, he knocks out Christos Yagos pretty badly in round one, and then he knocks out Manuel Torres pretty badly in round one at the Sphere. Manuel Torres is a prospect who everybody was super high on. He was 15-2 going into that fight on I forget how long of a win streak, but he hadn't lost yet in the UFC. 3 fights, 3 finishes, and then Ignacio goes out there and starches him in round one with a few shots. So I think in this spot, Ignacio is going to have to really mind his P's and Q's early. I think he's going to have to weather a bit of a storm because Jalen does hit hard. And Ignacio, though, where he's going to shine is the second and third round. Like, I kind of see this going the same way that Dan Hooker's fight with Jalen went. Jalen's going to win round one or have a really good round one. And Ignacio Bahamondes is just going to work himself back into the fight with the cardio, with the volume, with the body kicks. Because, like I mentioned earlier, Jalen always has this big height and reach advantage over guys. He doesn't have that here against Ignacio. Ignacio is the same size as him. Ignacio fights long as well. I actually think Ignacio fights better from distance than Jalen. I think Jalen is a little more snappy, has power, can close the distance. But as far as like a leg kicking game and really throwing that really long left or right hand, I think Ignacio is better than him there. Is Jalen go to the grappling here? Possibly. Maybe he lands a takedown and can look for submissions. He's pretty good down there. He's underrated in my opinion down there. But the more he does that, and if Ignacio can work back to his feet, I think the more tired Jalen gets, and then he's prone to eating a big body shot or a big head shot that kind of changes the whole entire trajectory of the fight. So I'm going to go Ignacio Bahamondes over Jalen Turner. Not one I'm super confident in right now. I think this is going to be a very close and even fight, but I'm going to go with the younger guy who has better cardio and kind of just more of a will to win, kind of has more heart in my opinion. All right, boys, co-main event time. This one, so fun. We've seen it before. And I think everybody would watch this fight every single week if the UFC put it on. Justin Gaethje versus Rafael Fiziev. Justin Gaethje got the better of him in the first fight, but it was very close, especially through the first 2 rounds. And then, Fiziev slowed down. Justin started landing big shots, hurt him a little bit in round 3, and ultimately got the majority decision. One ref had it as a draw. Got the majority decision win for Gaethje. And now he's a slight underdog in this spot again, which I don't really necessarily disagree with for a couple of reasons. Gaethje's coming off that war with Max Holloway where Max got the better of him for most of the fight. Justin had some good moments. I think it was round 4, but Max ultimately in that round 5 pieced him up. He'd broken Justin's nose in that first round right at the end with a spinning kick. And then, Justin couldn't really recover with his breathing and his cardio. It just didn't look the same after that. And Max, man, he's going to throw a ton of volume. He's so accurate and he's such a good boxer that he was constantly touching the nose, making it worse. And then at the end, points to the ground, makes Justin fall into that trap of brawling, and he knocks him out cold. The clip got released of Justin after that knockout because the UFC at the time, the cameras, they were not showing Justin on the ground. That was scary, man. Justin took a while to wake up. Justin looked like he was, taking these big, deep breaths while he was unconscious, blood everywhere. And it was pretty scary to watch. And now he's 36 years old coming in against the guy who does hit hard, who's very, very fast with his hands in a super, super technical boxing style. For Fiziev here, he's coming off of an ACL injury that he suffered against Gamrot. It's been 2 years. He looks like he's been in Thailand. He's been training for the last 7, 8 months, begging for a fight, and he got the call to step in last minute. So I think he's going to be ready. I think he's in shape. I don't think Fiziev's a guy who gets out of shape and just kind of is goofing off, dicking around. I think he's a guy who's always ready, and I think he will be ready for Justin here. It's just, can Justin land the big shot or not? I tend to think, especially watching Justin even before Max, it's like he's getting rocked in every fight. It feels like, at least. Even in the first fight against Fiziev, Fiziev had some big moments and landed some really good strikes. Charles Oliveira drops him and gets a sub. Michael Chandler had him hurt on multiple occasions. Who else? Yeah, I believe, what did Tony? No, Tony didn't drop him, did he? No, that was Michael Chandler he dropped. Okay. But whatever it is, you watch Justin, he's always kind of wobbled at times, and eventually it might catch up to him if it hasn't already after that Max Holloway knockout. Or maybe that was just a thing where Max landed so much damage throughout the course of the other 24 minutes that he finally got him out of there in that last second. But, Justin being a little bit older now is basically my big concern, and the knockout, like I said. So I'm going to stick with Rafael Fiziev here. He's younger. He's just been itching to get back in there. And Justin's kind of hinted at, if he gets knocked out again, that's going to be it for him. He's walking away. He's going to retire. When that's on your mind and you're going in against the guy who knows he can eat your best shots and survive that, I think it's kind of bad for Justin here. I do think he could get touched up quite a bit. I think it's going to play out a little bit different than it did last time. And I don't really think Fiziev has terrible cardio that people think he did because of that Gaethje fight. When I watched it, I forget if it was in the first or second round. Fiziev kind of had like a cut right here, right under his eye, and then he gets poked in the eye by Justin, and then it just starts bleeding. And from then on, you could tell Fiziev was really bothered by it, and then Justin was just targeting that, hitting him with some big shots, and that the cut was opening wider, and he just had trouble with that eye for the rest of the fight. Could it happen again? For sure. Cuts happen in most fights. They go the distance in MMA. There are striking matches. It could definitely happen again. I just think this time, if it doesn't, Fiziev could have more success down the stretch. So I'm taking Rafael Fiziev. It's going to be a fun fight. I think there's going to be a lot of violence. I think both guys are tough enough to make it to the bell. But, if Gaethje's chin is gone, he could be in some trouble here. All right, main event time. Alex Poatan Pereira, Magomed Ankalaev. Man, I've gone back and forth on this, actually. The line is weird because you look at everything that Alex has done in the UFC, from his debut to, finishing Izzy in their first fight in the UFC, to beating Yuri Prohaska twice by knockout, Jamal Hill, Khalil Roundtree. You would think going in against Magomed, he would be a little bit more of a favorite just because Magomed has taken a few losses in the UFC, taken a draw to Jan Blachowicz, that submission to Paul Craig in his debut. And, outside of those two, he had the no contest against Johnny Walker. But since then, all the fights in between and after, he's been super solid. And he's shown that he's a very dynamic striker. Not that he has the most power or the most volume in the world, but he is talented and he is good with his timing. And he's shown to be tough, too. Like, this guy is eating some shots from some power punchers. I mean, Alexander Rakic in his last fight comes to mind a little bit. My problem with it here is that people expect Ankalaev to wrestle. And I think that would be super smart of him because that's where he's going to have an advantage. He just doesn't really have that game plan that often. I mean, he took down Johnny Walker and he took down Jan Blachowicz, but couldn't really control Jan Blachowicz. And before that, he's landed a couple of takedowns here and there in fights. He just doesn't really go to it for his, that's not really what he leans on to win fights. He leans on his striking. He's very technical, and it's won him a lot of fights, and he has a chin too. So, if he comes out here against Alex and stands and trades with him for 3 rounds, I think he could get caught for sure. But I also think that, Alex is going to land more damage where Ankalaev might just land more volume. But if he does come out and try to wrestle and does find takedowns, we saw Jan Blachowicz control Alex Pereira for a while. Jan then got a little bit tired, and Alex was able to open up later in the fight with the striking. I don't really see Ankalaev getting tired like that. So that's what it all comes down to for me, and that's what's keeping me away from a bet on either side. I don't really trust Ankalaev to go out there and wrestle for 25 minutes, and I don't really trust that Alex could defend it for 25 minutes if Ankalaev decided to. So that's where I'm kind of at here. While it's on the feet, um, I think it's pretty simple, man. I think Alex is going to have a chance to knock him out, and I think Ankalaev is going to have a chance to hit him more often. But I think he's got to watch out for the leg kicks. I think Alex will be targeting that after seeing what Jan Blachowicz did. And if they do strike for that long, Alex is going to land him. And, if Ankalaev starts to get um, a little bit busted up there, man, it could change the whole entire, form of the fight. Once Alex gets guys hurt to the legs and they're hobbling on one foot, that's when he starts really opening up and his confidence really grows and he starts landing that left hook. So, I mean, I could definitely see that happening too. I'm just so torn on this fight. I'm going to take Alex Pereira because it's just so hard to doubt him. But if Ankalaev does wrestle, he's going to make it really, really interesting. I don't know. It's such a straightforward fight. Like, there's really not much more to say about it. Is Alex, he is getting a little bit older. It's kind of now or never to stay on this run and win these big fights. I think the first one he loses, could maybe have him slow down a little bit and maybe not fight as often anymore. So, I'm really going to be excited to see him fight here. He's a guy that I wish we would have got when he was 24 and not 34 or 5. And I'm just going to try to enjoy the fights he has while he's here. This one, like I said, Alex Pereira, the pick. Not much more to say. I think it's pretty straightforward on how this fight could go for either guy. I'm just going to stick with the guy who makes it happen, who pulls that magic out every single time. All right, boys, those are the picks. Those are the breakdowns. UFC 313. Make sure to hit subscribe, drop a like, drop a comment. I would greatly, greatly appreciate it. Again, if you need a sports book, BetUS is available in 49 of the 50 states. The only state it's not available in is the state of Washington. And if you do want to use it, down below, it's going to be in the bio. And your first 3 deposits are matched up to 150%. That's extra cash to you. And if you want to get every single bet that I placed this week for UFC 313, go to winnable.com/HOF picks and use code parlay to get you a free trial. See all of my bets, all of HOF picks bets. If you want to tail them, do it. If you want to fade us, you'll be able to see them as well. Either way, I think you could find some value there. So, next card up next week is going to be, let me check on it for you real quick. I don't know why I had it on the top of my head and now I can't think of it. Let's see. We've got some good ones coming up. I know we got UFC Mexico next week. All right, next week's at the Apex, Vittori versus Blaydes. Then we get the London card, Edwards versus Brady. And then we get the Mexico City card, Morono versus Urseg. So, again, great fights coming up. I'm going to be doing these breakdowns every single week. Everybody be good to each other, man. This world is weird, crazy. The society is messed up. This community is toxic, the MMA community. Just be good to each other, man. Hit the subscribe, drop a like, drop a comment. Good luck this weekend if you're betting. We'll see you next week for the Apex card.